My family goes back for generations in South Louisiana, starting with my great-grandfather, who was a surveyor. My grandfather lived on the coast of Louisiana in a little town called Leeville. And in 1896, they had a pretty bad hurricane, and it ruined the home, and they moved further north on Bayou Lafourche. In those days, people were homesteading properties. My grandmother talked my grandfather into leaving that position, and he went a little bit further up the bayou. Eventually, he worked himself up to where he was the superintendent of a shipyard called Barker Barge Line in Lockport, and that's where he trained my uncles. And after the war, my father decided to start his own business, a small machine shop on the banks of Bayou Lafourche. That became Bollinger Shipyards, with 14 locations in Texas and Louisiana. My father grew up in the Depression and never forgot that. He'd remind me that I didn't know what it was like to operate in a very tough environment. And at one point we were down to 17 employees, and every vessel we owned was tied to the dock. And I said, "Dad, how bad does it have to get?" And I'm proud to say in 70 plus years of being in business, we never had a year that we lost money. And of course, we were very large in ship repair, which is somewhat more stable. I never, ever, ever thought of being in any other business. I didn't choose it as a career, but it was a natural career for me, and it's a business that I loved. I think we were very successful in growing it through good times and in bad, and built a substantial operation. But things were bad. In the late 70s and early 80s, the oil field was starting to slip, which was our primary source of customers, and I went out on a limb and bid on a Coast Guard job. Eventually won the contract. That was in August of 1984. And we ended up building under that contract 49 island-class patrol boats. That was followed by the coastal patrol boats, the CPBs. Then we built Cyclone class, and now we're building the 154-foot fast response cutters. We built 14 ships for the Navy. And I think we've had probably the most successful contracts in the history of the Coast Guard. Very, very, very few disputes, and we have built over 150 ships for them. And that has proven to be extremely successful for both of us, for the Coast Guard and for Bollinger. I watched my father leave the company in 1985 when we bought him out. And it was a shock that a man who had spent his entire career building a business walk away from it as he did, with pleasure. And I just didn't think I could do that. And when my sons and I decided to sell the business to my nephew, it was a great event. We were happy as a family to be doing that. It stayed in the family. And when I left, I was very proud that we had one of the largest shipyards in America that wasn't a pure naval shipyard. And I just shifted gears and never slowed down. I established a family office here in New Orleans, and I don't say I retired, I said I changed directions and changed careers. Instead of being a shipbuilder and ship repair guy, I'm an investor, and it's just as hard to work. I am busier now than I have ever been. People think having money is something that's easy. Putting money to work is work. Growing up in the shipyard business and spending my career there, I never really had a good view from my office. And if it was a view, it was a view of another building or possibly a ship. And when I retired from the business, I was determined to have an office with a view. I do pause often during the day with a pair of binoculars and study the ships going up and down the river. Many of them we built, which gives me a sense of pride. So being in this location, watching the maritime commerce of this country flow before my eyes, watching the rise and fall of the river from season to season, all of it has great, great pleasure. My father always taught us to give back. The Lord has been good to us, and we should return both our time and our treasure to do good for the public. We've always been doing that. He always did it, and my family has grown up in that same mode. Obviously, the Coast Guard Foundation is a group that we were very close to and I was very active in. I served 15 years as Vice Chairman of the Coast Guard Foundation, and after I got out of business, they invited me to be Chairman. The Coast Guard, being one of the oldest maritime law enforcement agencies in the country, 1790, needs to be recognized, and the historical contributions they have made to the growth of this country are critically important to understand the background in this great service. Law enforcement, search and rescue, saving lives, pollution control, fisheries patrol. They have such a huge impact on our everyday life. So I think the Coast Guard is just such an important service that its history needs to be memorialized. The Coast Guard Museum has been a long time in the planning and the thought process. I've been involved with it for over 20 years. The Coast Guard leadership, as well as the environment, is the right time for this to be done. And New London is the great location, the home of the Coast Guard Academy, to build this fantastic new museum. And I'm convinced that it will be built. I'm really excited to be part of it. So we, as a family, have been involved in many public service areas, higher education, secondary education. All of those things are so important for our future and the next generations. My wife and I travel the world. We're very active in other organizations that bring us around the world. I'm currently the international president of CEO, which is a group of business leaders, 2,000 in number, all over the world. I've been blessed to do a lot of things, not only in my career, but in my philanthropy and my public service. And I think I've made a difference. My dad always wanted us to make a difference. But there's no question that the premier thing in my life has been my involvement in the World War II Museum here in New Orleans. My wife and I are the largest contributor to the museum. It's something that I think needs to be told, how that greatest generation, how the American spirit won the biggest battle of the last century. I can see that in 2020 we will have built out the campus we set out to build. And the legacy it leaves for those veterans who fought in that war, to me, is one of the most lasting things in my life.